Are you a man looking for an intensive program to help you overcome your sexually addictive behaviors? Gateway to Freedom is your answer. Gateway to Freedom is a 3-day intensive workshop for men seeking to overcome sexually addictive behaviors. Whether married, single, or divorced, Gateway to Freedom will help men regain hope for a new life of purity and real contentment. The workshop is conducted by experts in the field of sexual addiction recovery. Your experts have over 35 years of combined experience. Read testimonials of workshop alumni at gatewaymen.com. Get all the info and register online at gatewaymen.com or call 1-800-49-PURITY.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I'm the founder of the Gateway to Freedom Workshop. I want to personally invite you to be part of our next workshop coming up January 16th through the 18th in Texas. So call us today at 1-800-49-PURITY or visit gatewaymen.com.
Welcome to Pure Sex Radio, training men, educating women. Are you ready to get real and start living each day in purity? This dynamic program is designed to educate, encourage, and equip listeners with the tools necessary for living a life of sexual purity. Pure Sex Radio brings you the best in mobile talk radio. Listen to real-life struggles, learn how to overcome lust, pornography, and sex addiction, and get serious about purity. Your hosts for Pure Sex Radio are Jonathan Doherty and Stephen Cervantes. Jonathan is the director of Be Broken Ministries and founder of the Gateway to Freedom Workshop for Men. Stephen is the founder of the Hope Counseling Center. Visit us online at puresexradio.com. And now, please welcome Jonathan and Stephen on Pure Sex Radio.
Good day, radio listeners. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. We're glad to have you back here with us. My name is Jonathan. I'm here with Stephen. Stephen, how are you doing this morning?
Blessed. Thank you for asking.
Excellent. Well, we really kind of set the table last week for the new vision for male sexuality, and I'd say we took a long time setting the table, but we started getting into some of this vision, and I hope that especially for the dads out there that are listening, that it started to give you maybe a feel for, man, how can I speak these words into my son's life? How can I cast a vision for him? But I hope also it resonated with you to where you started realizing, as we looked in the first three vision statements here, that, listen, this is something that's part of growing as a man. That to struggle with your sexuality, to have this tension in your being between the truth of how God's made you and then just kind of the world we live in, and that this is an essential part of that growth process, not something that you could just say, I want to opt out of because it's hard, it's difficult, I don't want to do this. And so, Stephen, I'm going to pass it off to you, and I guess we're just going to keep going through this vision, because here's the thing, folks, where we're going with this is there's a vision that we want to try to compile here for you, but also out of that, then we're hoping, I'm going to give a teaser here, Stephen, that we're hoping that then what will happen is support groups will begin to not only catch this vision, but we've got an idea that we're going to roll out either this week or next week about how groups and maybe even just accountability partners in general can help one another to pursue this vision of healthy male sexuality.
So you have to listen to the previous podcast to get the first part of this talk, because I'm going to start on number 4, and it's not going to make much sense without the first part that we covered. So I'd encourage you to go back, and if you've already listened, then let's go to work. Number 4, protecting purity and innocence is a requirement of healthy manhood.
Now, see, this is interesting to me, Stephen, because, some guys will maybe feel, and we'll unpack this a little bit, some guys might feel that this is like a contradiction. You're saying, okay, struggling with sexuality is part of manhood. God knows just you're going to struggle. That thinks the struggle is essential. And then you say protecting purity and innocence is a requirement of healthy manhood. And I think this is where some guys, they might have misunderstood the idea of struggling, meaning that you're perpetually failing. And what I think is great about this is it's saying, why is there even a struggle? Well, it's because this is part of what you're supposed to be doing as a man, protecting purity and innocence. And guess what? The struggle, this is something that I think guys need to understand. When you start making it a part of your mission, so to speak, to protect your purity and your innocence, guess what will happen? The struggle will increase.
Mm-hmm. Don't tell them.
Now, we got to be honest here, Stephen.
Okay, sir.
And the reason that's the case is because, guys, if you've been sloppy with your sexuality, if you haven't been holding the line of purity, if you haven't been even working on this in any way, then you've got a type of struggle, and you're probably drowning in sexual brokenness, and you're probably drowning in shame and all that. But then guess what happens when you start saying, you know what, I want to get cleaned up, and I want to start setting some specific lines around my sexuality and start holding to those. The struggle will increase for a season because maybe you've never had that practice before. You've never said, I want to hold the line of purity. I want to be innocent and work on that. And so, Stephen, what do you think about that? The idea that for a season, the struggle will increase because maybe you've never done that before.
Right. If you've losing weight is a struggle.
Yeah.
It's harder to lose weight because you eat everything you want, then you can't, right? Then getting fit is a struggle, right? Engaging a spouse is a struggle, but they're all great things and they're worth the battle. And so protecting purity and innocence means you keep a part of yourself light and free. And the statement is, it's a requirement of healthy manhood. That means godly, whole, healthy, real manhood.
Now, I want to ask you a question because I know that there was a talk that you gave one time, and you made a similar kind of statement like this, where you said that, as men we're to protect innocence, and about half the crowd started laughing. Now, so what do you mean by...
That's true. I had forgotten that.
What do you mean by innocence? Because I think a lot of times guys especially will not associate manhood with innocence. They almost feel like, what do you think is the connotation that guys have with innocence? And what do you mean by this word innocence?
Well, think about the garden, right? Mm-hmm. We go back to the garden. Adam's in the garden. He is pure and innocent, and he's free, and he's light, and he's there to discover the world. He's not cluttered or divided in his being with secrets. He's just a boy with big eyes, wonder, and curiosity, and he's free. Now, compare that to a sex addict who's got shame and guilt and brokenness, desperation. He's ruined a bunch of females' lives, and he feels bad, and all he wants is another fix of pleasure. How much freedom and light does he have? Mm-hmm. Does that sort of answer it?
Yes.
Or do you want me to go somewhere else?
No, and I think that's important to say that because I think, again, a lot of guys especially, you talk about innocence in the context of manhood, and guys are just going, what? I think of innocence as like a little tiny infant that's weak and powerless, and they don't understand that our design originally was to be completely free of sin and to be completely just in wonder and awe and playfulness in the garden and in the world that God created for us.
Amen. You said it just right. You said it perfect. Free and light and wonder in the garden that our Father has for us. That's the vision. That's why we must protect purity and innocence in our being if we're ever to be totally free.
And think about how that even attaches to our sexuality. If we think of our one of our missions as a healthy man is to be innocent in our sexuality, then that means, you know what, we don't need to bring all the stain of pornography and all the filth of all these other sexual sins onto our sexuality. Instead, we need
into our being, in
Yeah.
our gut, right? And woven in our emotions and mucking up our worship. And
Yeah, let's stand at the gate and say, no, I'm going to protect the innocence of my sexuality, because you know what? It's reserved for this bride of mine. And we can be playful, and then we can have a garden experience over here in our sexuality. But I don't want to let anything else stain this and come in here and mess it up and confuse it and make it trashy and dirty. I want to protect it. And so that's the image
good.
that I get of protecting purity and innocence.
excellent. So number 5, sexual thought management is where God wants every man to practice discipline. Sexual thought management. Temptation comes, arousal, beauty, challenging situations. Sexual thought management is where God wants every man to practice discipline.
And this is where I think we get stretched, because every behavior, every decision originates with a thought. So if you think about it, there's no decision that anybody has ever made to cross the line of sexual purity that did not originate with a thought. So if you can think about that for a second.
Yeah, I'm pulling it apart as you say it.
So listeners, when you have crossed the line of pornography, when you've crossed the line of other forms of sexual sin, you can be certain that every time you've done that, it originated with a thought. That decision to cross that line originated with a thought. And so this is why I believe this idea that sexual thought management is where we need to practice discipline, is because it's there that our decisions originate. So if you want to be a man of purity, guess what has to happen the moment the tempting thought comes into your mind? That's where you got to do the work. That's where the discipline comes. That's where the guarding of the gate, so to speak, happens. You can't say, it's sort of a little late when you've been looking at porn for 3 hours and say, I really should probably not have let that, come into my mind. It's like you're already way across the line there. Now, don't misunderstand. God's grace is sufficient. Forgiveness is available. All of those kind of things. But I think this is saying we need to do the work way earlier. If we're going to have godly character and purity, you got to do it way earlier.
And are you going to do sexual sloppiness or sexual discipline? Right? And we're in training, right? We're in training to be Christ-like, to get our bodies under control so they're consistent with our spirits, and get our mind under control so they all work together to the same end.
And let me just, on a practical level, let me share with you something personal from my life that I've used, and especially it's been extremely helpful over the years. It's a verse that actually reminds me that while this is a struggle, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. First John 5:3 says this: "This is the love of God, to obey His commandments, and His commands are not burdensome." Guys, when I have
wow, that's great.
When I have just that tempting thought, the moment there's just a little seed planted in my mind, I realize that's the moment to take care of it, because then the only reason I believe that temptation becomes more and more difficult is because we let it linger longer and longer. But if the moment you have that hint of like something that's trying to pull you away from your purity and pull you away from God's design for your sexuality, if in that moment you will say, you know what, I'm going to obey and I'm going to move in this other direction, I'm going to go towards my healthy relationships, I'm going to plant new thoughts in my mind. You know what I've found is that obeying God really isn't a burdensome thing. His commands don't add more weight to my life. Obeying His commands does not mean my life is going to be full of more shame and more heaviness. And so I just hope that maybe will help you, that when you're thinking about, I need to practice this discipline of dealing with these thoughts way early, maybe that will help you. Because for me, it reminds me too that, the way I sort of prove my love for God, if I claim to be a follower of Christ, is to do what He tells me to do.
Right.
And He says, don't let there be a hint of sexual morality, turn away, and so try to do that practice way earlier than maybe what you're used to.
That's good. So number 6 says, this practice discipline right? Number 5 is sexual thought management is where God wants every man to practice discipline. So number 6 is this practice discipline is preparation for marriage. So remember, we're talking to a bunch of college guys, but I think this is true also for the rest of your life.
It is, yeah.
But if you want good training to be married, then stay cleaner and lighter and freer and grow in other areas. Don't grow in sexual sloppiness and think if you sleep with 100 women, then one woman is going to make you happy. Or if you have 1,000 porn photos in your mind or 10 different fantasy stories, that somehow one woman is going to satisfy. So practicing discipline is preparation for having a great marriage.
And what I hear in this is when you say in practice for marriage is, in marriage we're called to oneness, we're called to faithfulness, where there is an exclusivity in marriage that is healthy and good, because it's like we are to direct all of our sexual energy toward our spouse. And so what I'm hearing you say here is, and by the way, I think you're right. This is not just good preparation for marriage. This is a good practice throughout marriage, because what it does is it's saying I'm getting the right frame of mind for how God wants me to manage and direct my sexuality. It was never meant to just be, as the proverb says, spilled on the street and just put out there for anyone and everyone.
That's good.
So it really helps us move towards greater faithfulness in our marriages.
Number 7, human sexuality is not a need. It is a sacred, wonderful gift from the Father.
Now unpack that a little bit more, because I've got some things I want to say on it, but I want to hear what you mean by that, because some people are going out there. Because how many times have you heard this? I just got a high sex drive. I need to be sexual.
So what are needs? Food, water, clothing, shelter. All those basic things that if you don't have, you really are going to die. Those are needs. But releasing sperm is not a function of survival. So it's a sacred act to be intimate with a spouse. It's a wonderful gift of affirmation and comfort and pleasure and oneness. And we're designed for oneness. And so this is where you see, it's like the Father said, it's not good for Adam to sleep alone. Why doesn't he curl up with someone? Why doesn't he have a friend? Adam needs a partner. And that partner should fit together with him so that two can become one, so that oneness looks like us, Father, Son, and Spirit. Mm-hmm. Everything in the Father's creation is a reflection of the Father and Son. The beauty, his humanity, right? Everything he created is to bring him glory and to reflect him.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I sort of discovered and was shared with me early on in my recovery, that was kind of revolutionary for me, because I just always had I'd made my sexuality sort of the central aspect of my being, that everything revolved around that, so that it was very hard for me to think of sexuality as something other than the core need in my life, and everything was driven by that.
But, think about it. You were a boy in wonder once, right? And then talk about what you just said. Everything revolved around, from morning to night, every thought that was mine, not if I had to think about work, that's their thoughts. But mine, all of my thoughts were, how do I pleasure me? When do I get a chance for a thrill? Why don't I get a rush? Me at the center, right?
Well, and that's just it. And so one of the things that it showed me was that by making my sexuality my central need, it in fact made my life one-dimensional. And I couldn't see myself in all these other facets of how God had made me, in terms of my intellect and my emotions and my will and all these. So I didn't realize, that I had really kind of made myself a narrow human being. In other words,
right, and supersized in one area and stunted in all these other areas.
Yeah, and so part of being able to see my sexuality not as something that was a need, in the sense that if I'm not sexual, I will die. it allowed me to sort of grow in these other areas and see myself as more of a rounded individual. There's more to my life than this one-dimensional aspect of sexuality. And in fact, it made me, that's why I like the way you put it here, that it's a wonderful gift. It made me more appreciative over time of the idea that God made me a sexual being, that I didn't have to pursue every urge. I didn't have to go down every trail that was asking me to go down. But I could see it as God has given me this precious treasure, this great gift that I get to share with my spouse. And so it just gave me a new perspective on the gift aspect.
And take all that energy home, right? Mm-hmm. And your wife is going to be wounded and a struggler too in her own way, and create a safe space where two can become one and nurture, and you can just hold her, or she could hold you, and you could speak words of comfort, and she could speak words of blessing, and back and forth, this sacred union where we rest together, we fight together, and we rest together, and we encourage one another on to the goal. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what we're trying to do, and make that a sacred place. So, let's see. Number 8, love for God, self, and others is demonstrated through this obedience. So when you're obedient, you love God.
I should have held off on my verse until this one, right?
Oh, no, you can repeat it. That's good. Yeah. Truth is always good. Love for God, love of self in a God sort of honoring way, that he made you a temple. Mm-hmm. And so be respectful of that temple, right, that he made you. You have a body. He made you with a personality and a gifting. Be respectful. Be kind and loving toward yourself to nurture, not self-love, but respect love, because God made you for him. So you're a cherished object. So love God, love self, and love others. And by doing so, you will demonstrate obedience to the Father.
Yeah, and I think of where in 1 Corinthians 6 it says that we were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your body.
Yes.
So, when we are choosing to go God's way in terms of how he's even instructed us to manage our body, which includes our sexuality.
That's right.
We are not only honoring God, but like you said here, we are actually honoring our own bodies, and we are honoring the bodies of others. Because what is sexual sin and lust if it's not really taking from others what doesn't belong to us, whether it's through pornography, prostitution, anything? Essentially what we're doing is we're saying, I want to take you and use your body and your person for my own pleasure.
Right. To build me up.
And
but
so
go ahead.
And so the neat thing about this is when we decide to say, listen, I want to actually seek to do things the way God's designed me. We honor all three. We are honoring God, we're honoring our own bodies, and we're honoring the bodies and persons of others.
That's good. Because we are the creation of the I didn't create me, right? I have to have the right order in terms of love. And so some people will tear themselves up, and they will destroy themselves, call themselves names. They will have shame dialogues of worthlessness and stupid, lazy, ugly, just go on and on and on, right? But if you don't have the Father's love inside in your being, then you're probably going to have lies screaming at you.
Mm-hmm. And on a little bit of a practical level here, one of the things that I've liked to put into my head whenever I might be tempted to do one of these things that's going to be dishonoring to God or my body or somebody else, especially when there's a temptation to, let's say, fantasize. I will remember that phrase that says, this is somebody's daughter. The idea of saying, this is a child of the King. This is somebody who deserves the honor that is due, being made in the image of their Creator.
That's right.
And when you start to reframe it that way, I think sometimes it helps to take us down the correct path, rather than continuing to go down our own path that says, this is for my lust and my pleasure. It's saying, let's honor our own body, but also honor the body and the person that we're being tempted to fantasize about.
That's good. So, number 9, So let me read 8 and 9 together. Love for God, self, and others is demonstrated through obedience. But the opposite of obedience is chaos. So if you don't live in design, if you don't practice godly love, you will live in chaos.
And you know how I think about this? The image that comes to my mind is the idea of a house, the structure. In order for a house to stand, it has to be engineered and put together in a proper way. If somewhere along the line somebody says, one of the builders says, you know what, I don't really want to put those wall joints together that way. I don't want to put the foundation together that way. Guess what's going to happen? You might be able to lean some stuff together, but it will come crumbling down. It will crash. It will break apart. And I think that's kind of what you're saying here is there is a design. There's a design by the designer that says, I'm going to show you how the house will stand. We're told to build our house on the rock, right? But if you want to go play in the sand over there and you want to try to lean all these boards up against each other, what's going to happen is the storms come, the waves are going to come in, that thing's going to fall apart. It will be absolute destruction. And so I kind of almost use the word destruction in the idea of chaos, because same sort of deal. It's just disorder. It's in disarray.
I just noticed I typed the same line with an expanded view just below this line. So let me read this, and this can replace the one because it expands it. Every man will live in obedience with controlled sexuality, or he will live in chaos with a secret inner life of turmoil. So that's sort of an expanded version, if I could.
So so men, if you heard that, here's your choices. I mean, this is really what it boils down to. We can either choose to live according to the designer's design, which that's the obedience. And then in that sense, we're managing our sexuality well. There is a peace. There's a type of stability in that. Or we can choose to say, I want to build it the way I want to build it. And I want to do it the way I want to do it. And that leads to this chaos or disorder. And every guy who's gone that direction knows that does create this secret inner life of turmoil. There is no peace in constructing our sexuality in our lives the way we want to.
Right, because in that chaos is lies and taking and breaking promises and stealing what was not yours and confusion, and it grows. The sloppier you get, it grows. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then let's keep going, because number 11 is what must grow in us as we go forward? 3 things must grow in us: submission, rest, and worship. Mm-hmm. So my will submitted, I bring my being to a state of rest. So I'm not in turmoil, divided, tearing myself up. Because people that have sexual addictions, they don't rest well. They run, they hide, they cover, they lie. They're exhausted all the time. So I submit my will, I rest in my being, and I worship my Father.
You know, Stephen, up to this point, I would say if our listeners wanted just sort of a summary of the vision to this point, that's it. To submit your will. And part of submission means there's a humility that recognizes we don't have all the answers. We need the instruction of our designer. We need the help and the assistance of our maker. So there's a submission there, but then there's this rest. And I think about that especially, as we've gone through Christmas and the New Year and just how crazy that time can be, and so few find rest. And when we need that, our bodies need that, our minds need that. But then finally, this idea of worship. I think that where we get our energy, our strength, is when we align ourselves in total devotion and praise of our God. Mm. And folks, we're going to actually have to pause there. Don't worry. We are going to get through this. We want to complete the vision, and then we want to offer some helpful suggestions to folks out there who are wanting to spur one another on in these things. But we will be back here again next week and look forward to having you with us on the Pure Sex Radio broadcast.
Pure Sex Radio is paid for by Be Broken Ministries. Visit us online at puresexradio.com.